Hello again. A court case currently taking place in England hinges essentially around whether or not free speech is an absolute right or whether it should be limited in many ways, some of them seemingly complicated and difficult for the average person to understand. I'm a great believer in free speech, as I'm sure regular viewers of this channel will be aware, but I'm bound to say that I can see both sides of the argument here. That is to say, free speech is a vital human right and also something conditional and which must be hedged about and restricted. In Britain, the 1998 Human Rights Act guarantees us freedom of expression. Let me read out section 10 of the Act. Everyone has the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority and regardless of frontiers. The exercise of these freedoms, since it carries with it duties and responsibilities, may be subject to such formalities, conditions, restrictions or penalties as are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society, in the interest of national security, territorial disorder or crime, for the protection of health or morals, for the protection of the reputation or rights of others, for presenting the disclosure of information received in confidence, or for maintaining the authority and impartiality of the judiciary. Well, that seems clear enough, and journalists are free to comment upon anything and express their views without breaking the law. Or are they? Let me run a few scenarios past people and see what they think. Let's start with something fairly obvious. If I address an angry crowd in the street and urge them to commit murder, as a result of which people actually die in the ensuing riot which I've encouraged, most of us would agree with the legal position that I have exceeded the limits of what free speech should be. This is an extreme instance, though. What about in ordinary life? How about this? I ring up a woman and tell her untruthfully that I'm a police officer and that her husband has been killed in a road accident. She faints, falls to the ground, and as a result is injured during the fall. Am I liable for her injury? This actually happened in England in the 19th century. It's one of those cases that when you're studying law, one of those things like Donoghue v Stevens and Carlisle v Carbolic Smokeball Company. It's one of those cases that everyone has to learn about. The court found that telling a stupid lie like that, even as a joke, should not be regarded as free speech. What do we think? Should that sort of idiotic joke be against the law, or does my human right for free speech protect me from the consequences of my actions here? What about sending an email to somebody out of the blue and telling the person that you admire them? Is that okay? Well, of course, it definitely is. It happens often. And nobody objects to being flattered in this way. Least of all me. I've certainly had emails from people unsolicited telling me that they like this channel. That's fine. What about sending an unsolicited email every day, though? Perhaps telling the person that you've fallen in love with him or her. That might be a nuisance, but probably it's within the bounds of free speech. What about emailing a dozen times a day and also telephoning the person's workplace and saying that you're married to the person in question? Have I now overstepped the concept of free speech, or should this too be acceptable? Would it be a police matter if I contacted the person in this way and then began telephoning in person frequently to declare my love? By this point, I've probably brought myself within reach of the law. It might be regarded as harassment or stalking. But should that be the case? Does that mean that my human right to free speech is now being curtailed? Let's try one final example. What if I tell everybody, including his colleagues at work, that Jim Smith is a paedophile and that he suffers from an infectious disease like leprosy or AIDS? After all, these are only words. Does my right to free speech cover this kind of behaviour as well? All these are things which have actually happened in the past and ended up before the courts. From all of this, and careful reading of Section 10 of the 1998 Human Rights Act, we are able to see that our right to free speech is actually limited by quite a few things. We cannot say what we please, and sometimes it's wiser to hold our tongues. You have to bear in mind that there is no natural right to free speech. We only have the rights given to us in law. In Britain, the relevant law is the Human Rights Act, but then too there is the law around defamation, which is different, and also laws relating to harassment and so on. The Official Secrets Act also affects what we say, and so too does the Race Relations Act. Really, free speech is a conditional right, and it's surrounded by provisos and prohibitions. If we ignore these, then we're apt to end up in difficulties. It's hard to imagine a society able to function without at least some limitation upon what people can say out loud or write to others.